Okay, now coming from someone who is a major Handmaid's Tale fan and someone who has been avidly watching all 3 seasons thus far, it really upsets me that it has come to this. And by this, I mean the show is sort of becoming a flop. Now, the series is based on book material in the same way that Game of Thrones is. However, in this case, Margaret Atwood, the author of the novel, only published one book, which is what season 1 of the show emulates, and we see the final scene of that season ending in a cliffhanger like the book intended. However, beyond this point, the trajectory of the series is fully in the hands of the show's writers. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a massive fan of The Handmaid's Tale. However, in a very D&D Game of Thrones style, the series is beginning to lose touch with its fundamental principles. While the show touches on some deeper, darker social issues and captures many poignant and heartfelt moments, the show is unfortunately getting ahead of itself. I'm sad to say that the show lets audiences down relative to show plot holes, over-the-top close-ups, and messy plot progressions. Now, in terms of plot holes, this show is beginning to tread down a dangerous path of inconsistencies and contradictions. And the saddest part about these inconsistencies is that they become the undoing of the legitimacy of Gilead, the sick, ruthless, and backward society that the first season worked so hard to illustrate to audiences. Gilead is notorious for its ruthless laws, which derive from fundamental and ancient biblical practices, combined with a contemporary sick take on punishment for undeserving crimes. We see hangings, amputations, silencings, stonings, burnings, eye gouging, drownings, and even clitoral mutilation, all in the name of God. And as horrific and sickening as these punishments are, this is meant to be the reality of Gilead, an extreme and unforgiving system that nobody is immune to. However, we unfortunately end up seeing the law being overlooked in many circumstances, either for the sake of convenience or just out of sheer laziness. One of the prime examples we see of this is with the protagonist, June. She is constantly getting away with crimes that are seriously punishable by Gilead law, and yet she always somehow manages to worm her way out of everything. The first time we see this is when June tries to escape at the beginning of season 2, and yet instead of being punished for her crimes, she is reinstated at the Waterfords. And instead of being scorned for her actions, excuses are made in her defense. Oh, she was kidnapped, they say. However, we know full well from earlier episodes that her crimes would be inescapable. And yes, we do need to take into consideration that she is pregnant at this point, and God forbid you harm a pregnant handmaid in Gilead. However, Aunt Lydia gives her the option of either being imprisoned and then later executed after giving birth, or that she return as a handmaid and face no further consequences. But you would assume that Gilead, being the cold and merciless society that it is, would punish June to death after she's given birth, regardless. But nope, no further punishments, nothing. But instead, we see those who assisted her in her attempted escape being punished. But it seems that June is just untouchable. Also, the fact that Nick was not even a person of interest surrounding her kidnapping is totally bizarre. He would have been randomly disappearing at random hours of the day when he checks up on June. Surely someone is keeping tabs on people who appear to have links to June. I mean, he was the guardian serving the Waterfords at the time. He was also the one to leak the handmaid's letters to Luke whilst in Canada. Surely someone was asking questions about how these letters came to circulate. They would have had to have realised that it was someone on the inside. Oh, and then later in the season, when Nick takes June to the Waterford safe house to see her daughter Hannah, and Nick is taken away by patrolling guardians, though somehow manages to avoid persecution for no apparent reason. And on top of that whole fiasco, which was also Fred Waterford's doing, he also seems to escape from being exposed for his actions. It is also at the Waterford safe house that June gives birth to baby Holly, and yet no one stops to wonder where June was when giving birth. She just arrives back home with a baby? Shouldn't Gilead's authoritative figures be asking questions at this point? Or if authorities did know, why wasn't further investigative action taken to find out why she got there, or how she got there? Trouble just seems to surround these characters, and yet no one blinks an eye. Furthermore, if we go back to June in the first episode of season 3, the stunt that June pulls at the Mackenzies would be considered child endangerment. And as we are familiar with from season 1, child endangerment is punishable by death. How could we forget that frightening scene where we thought Janine would be stoned to death by handmaids? But all June got was a few slashings to the feet and then later a public humiliation. By the way, does it even count as a public humiliation if it's literally your own friends being forced to point their fingers at you when you know they're just being forced to do so by Aunt Lydia? Probably not. And also, the amount of times that June has foul-mouthed or has made snide remarks to authoritative figures is more than I can count on my own fingers. Sure, in season 1 we see a few instances of her being punished for this, but it seems that June has been shown some more lenience for no apparent reason, even after all the crap she's done. And yes, we do actually see her punished in episode 9 of season 3, when she is forced to stay by the side of her heavily pregnant and injured walking partner, of Matthew, as a punishment for the cruel behaviour she and other handmaids displayed towards this woman. However, this punishment seems superficial relative to all the crimes June has committed and gotten away with. It is also in this episode that June attempts to stab and ultimately kills Serena. She fails at the latter, but still slices Serena's arm. Yet nothing comes of this for June. Though here June remains, with both eyes and all limbs still intact, even though we all know that she really should be on the wall by now. And sure, you might say, oh no, they're keeping her alive so they can get baby Nicole back. Like, are you for real? Canada knows damn well how messed up Gilead is. They literally operate a refugee program to support and rehabilitate Gilead escapees. Even when Emily escapes Gilead and is walking through the hospital with baby Nicole, people are clapping for her. They obviously understand the horrific things she's been through. Anyway, what difference would it even make to Canada if they actually killed June in Gilead? Since Canada is aware of Gilead's evil and oppressive regime, they are smart enough to put 2 and 2 together and realise that June is forced to be a subservient handmaid, and if the circumstances would allow it, there would be no way in hell that she would be advocating for her daughter to be returned to Gilead. Not to mention, if they did return Nicole, the Canadians, once again, being familiar with the system of Gilead, would know that June would never get to care for that child in the way one would in a free society. Instead, she would be in the hands of the Waterfords. And also, I don't know about you, but if you were in the Canadians' position, wouldn't having a handmaid featured in propaganda as such, for leverage, anger the living crap out of you, knowing that she's treated like trash and will never have the opportunity to care for her children like she should, and is instead being strung along against her own will by 2 dirtbags to pledge for something that puts her in one of the most heartbreaking positions? Besides, the Canadians already know that June wants her baby to stay in Canada after pleading with the Swiss diplomats, who would have informed Canada on the situation. So then what difference does this propaganda actually make? Seriously. So these excuses for June being alive are just not substantial enough. And don't at me like, oh, well, if June was killed off and actually punished for her crimes, there wouldn't be a TV show. And yeah, I can acknowledge that. But the point is, the writers should have devised more sophisticated and intricate plot lines that don't consistently put June in the centre of conflict, where it is obvious to those in power and would, under the law of Gilead, be punishable. I mean, sure, have her creating havoc all you like, but at least make it look like it's behind closed doors, something a bit more secretive. Or if you're going to have her being rebellious, make sure that her reasons for getting off are actually justified, not just her getting off for no apparent reason. Or alternatively, just stop watering these things down and just have June punished accordingly. Period. Just like every other handmaid ever has been, all except for June. The writers made it very clear earlier on that no one is above the law of Gilead, not even the architect of Gilead himself, which brings me to another character who always seems to be surrounded by plot holes. So for starters, at the beginning of season 3, we see him taking June to the house of the Mackenzies in an attempt for June to retrieve her daughter. We can see his car parked right outside the property right before June finds a way into the house. About 5 minutes later, the authorities have been notified and roll up to the house to remove June from the premises. So June, actually does get punished for this, surprise, by having her feet slashed, but didn't the authorities ever stop to question how she got there? I mean, it would be practically impossible for any handmaid to get that far without assistance from someone on the inside. Not to mention, the commander's freaking car was outside the premises 2 minutes earlier, waiting for June. Surely the Guardians would have seen him. Like, seriously. But nah, nothing came of it, because what an inconvenience that would be. Also, why on earth would this commander request to have June assigned to his home? She has a track record of getting into trouble and screwing things up for Gilead. Perhaps it was due to some sense of remorse for creating the hellhole that is Gilead, but even then, by having June at his house, he is granting her even more power and leverage, since she knows all of his deep, dark, dirty secrets in assisting the resistance, especially after hosting Emily. For his own sake, wouldn't he want to sharpen his track record? Why take on another troublesome handmaid? He's only doing himself a disservice, as sooner or later people will start asking questions. Keeping in mind, this is supposed to be the brilliant, very important man who is considered the architect of Gilead's economy. Aunt Lydia's words, not mine. But, I mean, the man may be evil, but he sure as hell ain't dumb. But because of inconsistent writing, we're actually starting to view him in this way. And I know some people think that he may deep down be wanting to help the resistance, but based on his chauvinistic and domineering attitude and stunts he's pulled so far this season, I do not find that too likely. I mean, maybe he might come around sooner or later, but is it worth running the risk of persecution in the meantime? I think not. I think such a brilliant and important man would know much better than that. Now, if there's one thing I can give this show credit for, it's the cinematography. Throughout the series, we have seen some of the most poignant and powerful scenes which have been captured so perfectly and exemplify certain moods and themes that the series is trying to portray. And a prime example we see of this is in the first season, which is initially set in a warm summer atmosphere, and then as our plot gets darker and tragedy prevails, we see a stark shift in seasons to an unforgiving winter. This not only captures the mood perfectly, but is an allegory of the progression of cold and merciless events that we are seeing unfold before us. While we can give credit where it's due in cases like these, I cannot apply the same for all those over-the-top close-ups of Elizabeth Moss's face. I mean, seriously, it is getting to the point now where we already know that we're going to get a close-up of her pissed-off face right after something doesn't go her way. By now, I'm pretty sure I have memorized every single pore, freckle, and blemish on Elizabeth Moss's face. And these shots are becoming heavily predictable. And not only that, but it feels like we are also getting emotional close-up shots just for the sake of emotional close-up shots. I mean, this worked in season 1, but it was done appropriately. By this stage, it's becoming overdone and tiring. The writers knew these close-ups got a positive reception throughout the first 2 seasons, and now they're just running with it. Oh, a potential plot hole might emerge. Oh, never mind, let's just chuck in a serious and unflattering close-up shot of June. That always seems to work. That should distract them for a while as we try to cover up our dodgy writing. And I think one of the most ridiculous examples we see of this is when the Waterfords' house is burning down. Yes, burning down. Yet June seems to be too distracted and transfixed by the enchanting smoke and shaking walls to run for her goddamn life. But yeah, nah, she wants to stay inside a freaking burning house just to relish the moment. And sure, you might say that this is some sort of deeper metaphor for Serena's revolt, or perhaps a foreshadowing of what is to become of Gilead and the patriarchy, though it is done in such a highly pretentious manner that it is so unconvincing as a viewer. And the same goes for the rest of the unnecessary ugly-ass close-up shots we see throughout this season thus far. After covering plot holes and close-ups that are too close for comfort, I think it's pretty clear that this show is becoming very messy. And messy in even more ways, especially when it comes to messy and disconnected subplots. So far, we are seeing Moira and boring-ass Luke protesting in their spare time, and aside from that, being very tedious in Canada. A totally underwhelming progression, by the way. Emily reuniting with her family, Serena and Fred fighting to have Nicole back, an inconsistent attempt from June to find out all she can about her commander, June's mental stability being completely deprived over the course of 1 episode and doing a total 180 as she turns into a cold, unforgiving and insane woman for all of 2 minutes, only to do another 180 back to sanity. She literally gave me Dexter vibes in episode 9 of season 3. after she steals a scalpel and contemplates which corrupt character she'd like to kill first. This insanity segment seems super rushed and contrived to the max. Oh, and now Nick is apparently evil, and now he is also being sent away and promoted? Like, for what? He literally facilitated the resistance within Gilead, which allowed people to escape. Yet this also never came to surface, even though it should have. Okay, whatever. The Waterfords potentially moving to Washington. The handmaids in Washington all being silenced. Aunt Lydia's weak backstory of rejection and stepping outside of her comfort zone, which somehow completely robbed her of her morals and decency and turned her into the merciless and controlling woman we see depicted in the series. There is just so much happening at once that the show is lacking focus, and it's hard for me to see how the show will find effective direction at this point to lead to some kind of monumental season finale, especially since the season is more than halfway through. I mean, are they going to pull it off? It's questionable, but I hope so. But I mean, let's not get too hopeful to avoid disappointment. But it's up to the writers now. Please don't end up like D&D. Please don't just kind of forget good writing, just as long as it doesn't finish with another close-up of Elizabeth Moss's pissed off face. That is all I ask. Please and thank you.